2026 is not going to be a normal law school admissions cycle because everything around the admissions process is changing at the same time. We're seeing federal loan options disappearing. We're seeing LSAT score inflation. We're seeing a massive spike in law school applicant numbers and way more competition for scholarships. And so, if you're applying to law school in 2026 and you don't adjust to these changes, you're going to get left behind, plain and simple. You cannot afford to play the game the way it worked 5 years ago. You've got to adapt to the way the game works now. For decades, law students had a simple playbook for paying for law school. They would take out federal Stafford loans for the first portion of tuition and fill in the rest with Grad Plus loans, which are federal loans that covered everything else, like remaining tuition, living expenses, fees, even if you wanted to get a new laptop. And you didn't need a cosigner, you didn't need amazing credit, and you got access to benefits like income-driven repayment, public service loan forgiveness, and generous deferment options. And of course, none of this was perfect, but it worked pretty well, and it gave students flexibility and breathing room. But that system is going away. The government is phasing out Grad Plus loans. Of course, you'll still get Stafford loans, but they're not going to be enough to cover an $80,000 per year law school bill. And this change goes into effect starting July of this year in only about 6-7 months, affecting everybody starting law school this fall. And so now you have three options. Option number one is to take out private loans. But the problem is that private loans are a whole different ballgame. The interest rates are higher, the repayment terms are stricter, and there's no forgiveness if you go into public interest law. And if times get tough, you're on your own. There's no deferment, there's no forbearance, and private lenders also base approval on your credit score and income. And guess what most law students don't have before school? High income and excellent credit. So you might need a cosigner, you might not even get approved at all. And even if you do, the debt load can quickly spiral out of control. Your second option is to get family support. And if you've got parents or relatives who are willing and able to help, of course, that's great, but most students don't have that option. Many law school applicants are their first in their family to go to grad school, or they're coming from middle income or working class backgrounds where six-figure tuition just is not something their family can cover. And so the third option is to get scholarship money. And this, in my view, is the best path. It's the most stable, but it's also the most competitive. And the number one factor schools use to decide who gets merit scholarships is your LSAT score. Not your essays, not your volunteer work, not your undergraduate GPA. It's that single three-digit number out of 180. And so let's say you and another applicant both have solid applications, but you score a 164 on the LSAT and they score a 170. They're going to get a $50,000 scholarship and you might get nothing. And law schools are not shy about this. They're not hiding this fact. They need high LSAT scores to boost their rankings, so they reward those scores with money. And so if you want a scholarship, especially now that Grad Plus loans are disappearing, you've got to become the person they want to pay to attend. And that means treating the LSAT not as just another test, but as a financial strategy. If you can raise your LSAT score by just 5 points, that could be the difference between paying full sticker price versus getting half off tuition, going into hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt versus zero debt, and choosing between your dream school and having to choose a safety school. And that's why the smartest applicants this cycle are putting serious focus on their LSAT prep now, because they know that without Grad Plus loans to fall back on, the best money is merit money. And merit money goes to the people with the highest LSAT scores, period. And in a typical year, LSAT registration numbers follow a predictable pattern. They rise a bit in the spring and they spike in the fall. But this year, things were different. LSAT registrations are up way year over year, in some cases up 50% year over year. And more LSAT registrations means more test takers, which means more applicants. And so the LSAT test taker numbers predict what the applicant pool will look like going forward. And so when we see early test dates filling up, we know that a flood of applications will also follow, because students know that if they apply earlier, they have a higher odds of getting in and more scholarship money still available. Of course, better to apply later with a higher score than earlier with a lower score. So if all else is equal, but the thing is that all else is not equal, because if applying, say, in February would allow you to get a higher score, better to apply in February and still go this cycle. Alternatively, you could take the LSAT in April or June and apply the second the applications open in the fall. Also a perfectly fine move, of course. Now, we have seen a significant increase in applicant numbers overall. Applicant numbers are up 50% over the past 2 years. And so for every 100 people applying 2 years ago, we now have 150 people applying for the same limited number of seats. Law schools, of course, are not going to suddenly increase their application numbers, their law school seats by 50% in just 1 year. And so it means it's a more competitive pool. And so you want to have the highest possible LSAT score when the pool is more competitive. And the best way to apply with a higher score is to put more effort into your LSAT prep and to retake if necessary. Law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores, but rather they only take the highest score on record into consideration. And the LSAT's offered 8 times per year, used to be offered only 4 times a year. The number of opportunities to take it has now doubled, which is part of what is contributing to LSAT score inflation. And by LSAT score inflation, I don't mean the LSAT got easier. I mean the distribution of scores is slowly creeping upward. Now, the biggest factor is accommodations. When you qualify for accommodations on the LSAT, you might get time and a half, you might get double time, more frequent breaks, a quieter testing environment, and these changes are crucial for those with learning disabilities, whether it's ADHD, anxiety, or other medical conditions, and the intent is to create a level playing field. But there's a catch. Those who test with extra time tend to score significantly higher, and that is backed by the data. When you give someone 53 minutes per section rather than 35 minutes per section, or even 70 minutes per section rather than 35, it is a massive advantage. It means you can double check your answers, slow down on harder questions, and avoid silly mistakes. And those scores go up significantly, and they are not flagged for admissions. There's no asterisk or special category, no note that you got extra time, and everybody goes into this same pool of applicants. They see your score just like everybody else's, just one number out of 180, and both scores look equally strong on your score report. And that same number gets pushed to the American Bar Association, which in turn is where US News pulls those numbers from for inclusion in the ever-important US News Law School rankings. And so all of this LSAT score inflation is pushing percentiles down and pushing medians up. So for example, scoring a 173 on the LSAT used to put you in the 99th percentile, but now you've got to get a 175 to be in the same 99th percentile. And that, of course, impacts your chances for admission and for getting scholarship money. And I'm not talking about fairness or debating the fairness of the system. I'm only about understanding your playing field and adjusting your strategy accordingly, because if you're not getting these built-in time advantages, you've got to outperform. A 170 might have been good enough a couple of years ago, not anymore. Now, to stand out at top schools, especially for scholarships, you've got to be hitting the 75th percentile or higher. That's usually a 173 to a 175 at a top 14 law school, maybe 175, 176 at a school like Harvard or Yale or Stanford. And law schools care about the numbers, your LSAT score, your GPA, all the other factors, the soft factors, the application essays and such. They're not quantifiable, so they don't really impact things in quite the same way. And if your LSAT score is not up to par, if it's a bit weaker, it can destroy your financial future, even if you still got into law school. I mean, imagine that you apply to a private law school, tuition is $65,000 a year, but then you got to add in living expenses like books, fees, bar prep. The total cost of attendance could hit $250,000 or even $300,000 over the course of 3 years. So if you get zero merit aid, no financial aid of any sort, you're taking out big loans, maybe private loans, not just federal student loans. And so you're taking on significant debt, and then you land a public interest job paying only $65,000 per year. Now, you're making minimum payments that barely touch the principal on your loan. And so you defer when you can. You've got to push off to having a family, delay buying a home, and you're technically a lawyer, but you're financially stuck for the next 20 years. In contrast, If you take the LSAT seriously, you prep early, and you raise your score to a 172 or higher, you're going to the same school and paying the same sticker tuition, but now you've got significant merit aid discounting the total cost of attendance. Much better situation. That's $35,000 per year in scholarships, $105,000 off the top, and now your total cost of attendance is dropping to only, say, $170,000 instead of nearly $300,000. So fewer loans, lower monthly payments. You can have more flexibility upon graduating law school. And so much better situation for you and for your family. And so your LSAT score is a financial lever. It's not a test, not a gatekeeper, but a lever that you can use to your advantage. And the best part is, it's the one part of your application that's still totally in your control. Of course, you can't go back in time to raise your GPA, you can't change where you went to college, but you can spend 3 to 6 months getting laser focused on this exam and on raising your score, and that could really move the needle over time. And so in 2026 now, when Grad Plus loans are gone and scholarships are more competitive than ever, the LSAT score becomes the most valuable asset you've got. Now, there are two kinds of applicants in every cycle. The first kind thinks they're being responsible by applying early, prepping hard, and chasing scholarships. The second kind thinks they're going to figure it out later. And I think you can guess which group ends up with money in the bank, multiple offers, and choices. If you are serious about law school in 2026, the best thing you could do right now is to start your LSAT prep earlier than everybody else. Most people treat the LSAT like they're cramming for a college midterm. They start only a month or two before, think they'll just review the basics, and they panic when they plateau in the 150s. But smart applicants know this is the single highest ROI part of their application, so they give it 4 to 6 months minimum. If you start now, you can take the LSAT in April or June, retake it in June or August as a backup, and apply the second applications open in September, and lock in your score before the chaos of the admissions season begins. Now, you also don't want to target the median of the school because that's last year's number. You want to target the 75th percentile of the schools that you're applying to because you want to not only get in, but also get significant scholarship money. You don't want to pay sticker, and you don't want to get waitlisted. You also want to get real about the finances now, not later. Average applicants might apply to 12 schools, get into only 4 of those, pick the most prestigious, and take out whatever loan package they're offered. Then they spend the next 10 years paying for that one rushed decision. But smart applicants do the math before they apply. They ask, what is my target scholarship amount? What LSAT score will get me that? Which schools reward high scores the most? And can I graduate with under $100,000 in debt? In other words, the smart applicants reverse engineer a financial outcome, not just an emotional decision. You also want to practice under real test pressure. Not just taking test after test, measuring your results, being happy or sad about them, and then being disappointed and shocked when your official score drops 8 points from your best practice test. You've got to practice under real test conditions and review your mistakes in depth. Smart applicants take several tests under real-world test day conditions with 35-minute sections, no pauses, no music, no snacks, no stopping to check your phone. You treat it like it's game day because when it is game day, that way you're going to be ready. You also want to remember for motivation that your score is leverage. Higher LSAT score means better scholarship offers. Applying earlier means you're more likely to get in. And if your application essays are polished, you're going to make a better first impression. Law school admissions is like a negotiation. It's not a lottery. You're not begging to be picked or crossing your fingers and hoping and praying. You're choosing where you want to go, how much you want to pay, and what you want to get out of it, and then you reverse engineer that decision. And so know that law school is getting more expensive, Grad Plus loans are on the way out, competition's going up, and the most powerful lever you have to maximize your outcomes is to get the highest LSAT score possible for the best possible admissions chances. And if you would like my help, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons to everybody watching this now or later. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, and in my bio on TikTok as well. Open offer to everybody watching this now or later. Free LSAT tutoring lesson with me personally. Again, the link is unpluggedprep.com/start. I'm happy to meet with everybody watching this an hour later. Open offer. I'll put that information in the chat now. Feel free to book that call with me while there are still slots available. I'm happy to help. And I do see several questions here in the chat. I will get to as many of those as I can over the course of today's live. And by the way, if you find these lives helpful, I do these every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, wherever you're watching this. If you find this helpful, please do spread the word. The only way this grows is through word of mouth. I don't do any advertising for these, and the algorithm doesn't really boost these lives because they can't run ads during them. And so I really do appreciate your support, spreading the word in your Discord channels, Facebook groups, Reddit forums, wherever you're connecting with others who are studying for the LSAT. I really do appreciate your support. The more this grows, the more I will expand it over time. Sydney's asking here, I have access to over 70 practice tests. I take the June LSAT. How often should I take a practice test? Fantastic question, Sydney. I know a lot of folks here in the chat are also taking it in June. So to be clear, there are currently 59 numbered LSAT practice tests in the current LSAT format. They're numbered 101 to 159 on LSAC's Law Hub Advantage platform. If you have over 70 exams, you're probably using the old format LSATs, which I would not recommend because they still contain logic games, and logic games are, of course, no longer on the test. And so if your practice tests are numbered 1 to 94 or so, you're probably using the old outdated format. I would recommend getting Law Hub Advantage to use them in the new format that the LSAT's actually testing. So get Law Hub Advantage. Secondly, in terms of your question, how often should you take tests? A general rule of thumb is often 1 practice test a week, reviewing it in depth, maybe 2 practice tests a week if you have the leisure to study for the LSAT full time with no other obligations, assuming that you can still allow sufficient time to review your mistakes in depth. But before you take practice tests, I would recommend that you build a strong foundation in the different sections of the exam, the different sections, the different question types, because you don't want to burn through valuable limited practice material. At LSAT Unplugged, we use a framework called the LASER approach to LSAT prep. LASER is an acronym standing for Learning, Accuracy, Sections, Exams, and Review, and it's a cornerstone of my LSAT courses and my LSAT coaching programs. The L is for learning. It's building a strong foundation in the different sections, the different question types, reviewing foundational materials in LSAT prep textbooks or on-demand courses like what we offer. Secondly, you have A for accuracy, which involves drilling questions by type to better understand the proper perspective from which to view the different sections and different question types, like strengthen, weaken, flaw, parallel, resolve, and so on. Then you have S for sections, doing individual timed sections to better work on your pacing and time management. And then you have E for exams and endurance, taking your full-length timed practice tests. And finally, R for review, using a framework like the Socratic review method that we teach at LSAT Unplugged. Now, for someone like Sydney taking the LSAT in roughly 5 months, there's plenty of time to build a foundation before taking practice tests. For someone like A-Course, who just left a comment taking the LSAT in February with only about 4 weeks remaining, that's going to require a more intensive boot camp style approach that's going to involve primarily full-length timed practice tests. So radically different approaches depending on how far off your LSAT test date is. We like to personalize every coaching program for the individual student because someone like Sydney, who's got 5 months, is going to need a very different approach and different personal study plan than someone like A-Course, who has only 1 month remaining. For Sydney, it's going to be a more slow and steady approach, little by little, first building the foundation before transitioning into a focus on full practice tests. For someone like A-Course, we're going to recommend a more intensive bootcamp style approach where we take our standard 3 to 4 month curriculum and we compress and accelerate it into only 4 weeks with live coaching 7 days a week. And so Sydney, A-Course, 12, whoever else is watching this an hour later, feel free to book that free LSAT tutoring lesson with me personally at unpluggedprep.com/start. I'll be happy to meet with you personally and talk through your situation to help you craft a more personalized plan of attack. Because When we're crafting a study plan or a course of approach, we want to look at your current score, your goal score, and how much time you have remaining. Every student's situation is unique and different and requires a different prescription to get you to your goal on your time frame. Scanning through here for more questions, HDB is asking, if I have been granted admission, can I retake the LSAT to try and renegotiate scholarships? You absolutely can, and I wish that more students were aware of this option. In other words, you don't need to assume that you're one and done with the LSAT just because you've already applied. You can always retake the LSAT, assuming that you have not run into the LSAT retake limits, and that will allow you to have a better negotiating position because law schools report the highest LSAT score of their matriculating students to the American Bar Association, which in turn is where US News pulls that data from for inclusion in the US News rankings. And so even if you applied with hypothetically, say, a 160, if you retook and got a 170, that would, of course, benefit the school a great deal because now you've got a 170, and that 170 is what's going to the ABA and going to US News for inclusion in the rankings. So definitely retake if you think there is any chance that you could do better. And there really is no downside to retaking because law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores. They only take the highest score on record because the ABA only considers your highest LSAT score. So for that reason, I recommend that everybody retake the LSAT at least once because there is no downside. If you do better, awesome. You're now applying with a higher LSAT score. And if you do worse or remain the same, no big deal. The higher LSAT score on record is still what counts. So yes, definitely retake to get more scholarship money, to get off the wait list, to put yourself in the best possible position for admissions overall. And if you want my support for a retake whenever you're taking the LSAT, again, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons, unpluggedprep.com/start. We also, of course, offer private one-on-one coaching programs, on-demand video courses, small groups, my private coaching programs, some personalized study plans, small group classes, all of the above and more. We customize them to your curriculum, to your schedule, to your goals and time frame. And so I can meet with you personally and talk you through your schedule, help you craft a plan of attack. As for the question of when to sign up for the LSAT, you can sign up now. The registrations are open for April and June. The February registration deadline has already passed, but it's not too late for April or June. And LSAC will open up registration for LSATs beyond June sometime in the next couple of months. Last year, they offered the LSAT 4 consecutive months in the fall, August, September, October, and November. So you could take any and all of those if you wanted to. Not saying you should take all of them, but you could hypothetically and theoretically. The LSAT retake limits are not too stringent. They are offering, you can take it 5 times in 5 years, 7 times for life. And if you get a 180, you can't take it again, but you wouldn't even need to take it again at that point, of course. I recommend taking the LSAT whenever you feel ready to achieve your fullest potential. Don't take it on a whim. Don't take it cold officially just to see how you'll do or get a dry run. You can take a practice test for free on LSAC's Law Hub platform. You get 4 exams for free on there. You get the other 55 exams for a subscription of $120 for a year of access. Well worth the investment considering the importance of the LSAT. And no, they're not paying me to promote their platform, although I wish they were, but I think it's legitimately the best investment you could make for your LSAT preparation. Braden's got a question here asking, do you believe the next cycle, starting fall 2027, will continue the current trend? Is it possible to predict how competitive the next cycle will be? So I think that law school applicant numbers will probably go down a little bit because they have been peaking recently and no trend lasts forever. I think that a lot of the spike in applicant numbers is due to the economy and due to a lag of the so-called Trump bump in admissions. Basically, in presidential election years, people are more politically engaged, and that leads to a spike in LSAT takers and applicant numbers. So we've seen consecutive year-over-year increases in the number of applicants, but I think that will probably dip a little bit. Additionally, we're going to start entering the period of the demographic cliff, where basically, due to declining birth rates in the US, there are going to be fewer people graduating from college, fewer people applying to law school, because there are going to be fewer people in that demographic of 18 to 22-year-olds. And so going into 2030 or so, we're going to see dropping applicant numbers, which will actually make things better for the typical law school applicant. So I think that things will maybe be a little bit less competitive in terms of raw applicant numbers next cycle, but LSAT score inflation is continuing because of the rise in LSAT accommodations, the more frequent LSAT retakes, the removal of the logic game section, all of that making the LSAT easier and perceived to be easier. And so it's going to mean there are more high scorers. So in that sense, it will be more competitive, meaning you'll need to have a higher LSAT score to get in and to get scholarship money, but there will also be fewer people applying overall as the years go on. Dogs are my life. Awesome username, by the way. I love dogs also. But do you think writing an LSAT score addendum is actually smart if your LSAT score is low? Do I think it's smart? I'm never going to say don't write an addendum. You can keep it concise, matter of fact, but an addendum for having a low LSAT score is kind of pointless in my view because the numbers are the numbers. It's kind of like walking into a store and saying, I know this flat screen TV costs $500. I only have $200, but here's the reason why I have less money. It's like, okay, cool story, but you still don't have the numbers that are necessary to achieve the goal. So in contrast, a low GPA addendum is different because there could be some reason why your GPA was temporarily low, and then you raised it over time and showed an upward trend. Meaning, if during one semester of college you had a personal crisis, a family emergency, a health issue, you took a class in a subject that you just weren't good at and the curve was brutal, you can compensate for that later by showing an upward trend in your GPA for the subsequent semesters. But when it comes to the LSAT, law schools are going to be like, why didn't you just retake? If you had a bad proctor, if you had a tech issue, if you had nerves or anxiety, they're going to be like, well, why didn't you retake and give yourself another at bat, given that you have the opportunity to retake? And if you're like, well, I'm just not a good test taker, they're going to be like, okay, but there's the bar exam, which is really important. And law schools don't want to admit people who are going to fail the bar. The LSAT is demonstrated to have a good correlation with first-year law school grades as well as bar passage rates. And so you can write the addendum for a low LSAT score and explain why your score was low, but it still begs the question, well, why didn't you retake it and get a higher score to eliminate the impact of a previously lower score? I know that's not the answer you might have wanted to hear, but it's honestly what I think here. The LSAT's offered 8 times a year. And so even if you took it, say, in November and your score came back low, you could have retaken it in January, or you could retake it in February, or you could delay a cycle and get a higher LSAT score. Not only would that get you into better law schools, but it would also get you more scholarship money for law school admissions. Well worth giving it another at bat if you think you could do better. And if you don't think you could do better, the question is why? And if you really want to prove to yourself that you've got what it takes to succeed in law school and to pass the bar, to take on this 3-year obligation and 6 figures of tuition fees, unless you're getting a full ride, of course, the best way to prove to yourself that you can get into the best possible law school with as much scholarship money as possible and to succeed in law school, pass the bar, become a successful attorney, the LSAT is just one hurdle of many that you will encounter on this legal career journey. And so I strongly recommend not excusing a low LSAT score, but rather changing the circumstances by retaking, putting yourself in the best possible position. And if you don't think that you can do it, book the free call with me and I'll do what I can to help change your mind and prove you wrong and show you that you can succeed on this exam. Again, the link is unpluggedprep.com/start. Open offer to everybody watching this now or later. And to user 6102's question, do you look at essays? We do help with application essays as well, but first and foremost, we want to help you rock the LSAT because your LSAT score is the #1 most important factor in the law school admissions process. And if you have a great essay, but a terrible LSAT score, the essay will not compensate for the LSAT, but the opposite could be true. In other words, if you've got a fantastic LSAT score and a mediocre essay, you could still get in. And of course, we want to make sure that all elements are solid and stellar and as good as possible, but we want to first and foremost get you that score. And so we're not going to want to work on essays until you have the LSAT score to back it up. Exo Destiny is asking, how much time do you recommend to study for the LSAT? I recommend at least 3 to 4 months, ideally 5 to 6 months to reach your fullest potential on the LSAT. Can you do it in less time? Theoretically, yes, you could. We do help students who have just a month or two. We run intensive LSAT boot camps, which might be of interest to any of you taking the LSAT in February. We basically take our standard 3 to 4 month curriculum and compress and accelerate it into only 4 weeks by giving you live coaching 7 days a week. And so if you want to talk through a boot camp option, I'm happy to have that conversation. But ideally, for those of you taking the LSAT in April, June, August, or beyond, we'll be able to do a whole lot more to get you the highest possible LSAT score. So ideally, you will give it the time that it deserves given its relative importance in admissions, but if you have less time, we will still do what we can to help you out there too. Scanning through here for other questions. Allie's asking, I've got a 3.3 GPA. What score should I aim for on the LSAT? So I always recommend aiming for a 180. No reason to shoot for anything less, but your goals really ultimately depend on the schools that you're targeting, right? So if you want to go to Harvard, Yale, or Stanford, or any of the top 14 law schools, you should know that their LSAT medians are all 170 to 174. Their GPA medians are all approximately a 3.9 or so, or higher. And so a 3.3 GPA is way below median for a lot of law schools, not just the T14. And so you're going to want to compensate by having a relatively higher LSAT score. You're going to be a so-called splitter applicant, high LSAT, low GPA, totally fine to be in that position, by the way. Most law schools, nearly every single one, in fact, they weigh your LSAT score more heavily than your undergraduate GPA because grade inflation is just crazy, especially in the humanities. And so the LSAT score is considered a more objective third-party metric where they can more easily compare applicants from different backgrounds with different majors. And so always aim for 180. No reason to shoot for anything less. Get yourself the highest LSAT score possible, and it's especially important if your GPA is a bit on the lower side. Rio's asking, I just started studying for the LSAT on Friday. I want to take the LSAT in April, and if I have to in June. Is it enough time? It very well could be. I mean, I recommend that you give yourself at least 10 to 15 hours per week of dedicated LSAT studying. The more, the better, of course. 5 hours a week might not be enough. You want to give this the attention and time that it deserves given its relative importance. But of course, a lot depends on your current score as well as your goal score and the schools that you're targeting. And so the more context I have on all of those factors, again, where you're currently scoring, what your goal score is, your time frame, the schools that you're targeting, all of that context really helps me to give you better advice. And so the best way to have that, get that context, of course, is going to be in a more personal conversation that you could, again, book with me for free at unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, and in my bio on TikTok and Instagram as well. Happy to talk through your situation more personally and give you more tailor-made advice for your situation. Fades by Verain is asking, which part of the LSAT would you say is the hardest and requires the most practice and studying for? Well, there are only 2 parts of the LSAT now that are scored, at least, since the removal of the logic games section back in June 2024. They removed logic games and they replaced it with a second scored logical reasoning section, which is actually pretty cool because it means there is less material for you to study. Any gains you make in your understanding of logical reasoning are doubled across the 2 scored sections of logical reasoning since it's now 2/3 of the test. And so I'd say you should spend the majority of your time on the logical reasoning section. There are roughly 15 to 17 different types of logical reasoning questions on the LSAT, like strength and weaken flaw, necessary assumption, sufficient assumption, and so on. You've also got reading comp to work on, of course. Then there's pacing and time management, doing individual sections, and full-length exams to build up your endurance. But if there were a couple of areas I'd say are most important, I would start with in logical reasoning, necessary assumption, inference, and flaw, because those are the 3 most common types of logical reasoning questions. So they are a higher yield area for you. In other words, you're going to get the most bang for your buck by focusing on those areas in particular. I would master those before working on the less common types or the more rare types that show up much less often, like, for example, parallel reasoning, which everybody hates, or evaluate the argument questions, because those show up less frequently. And so you're not going to get as much benefit from working on those relative to the more common types of questions. So, one thing we do at LSAT Unplugged when we craft study plans for our students is we start them off with the most important question types and then only move on to the less common types after you've already mastered the fundamentals. So again, of course, happy to talk through your study plan with you if you book that free call with me, but I would start there. Leslie's asking, I have a PhD and I'm a tenured professor. Is it ridiculous to go to law school and switch careers? I mean, I don't think any career switch is necessarily ridiculous. I mean, it's your life, it's your career. How do you want to spend it? You've got a decade or maybe several decades to spend in your career, and is law what you want to do? Are you passionate about it? Is it what would make you happy? Are you going to regret on your deathbed that you did not pursue this goal? Of course, having a PhD, being a tenured professor, pretty awesome. You could, of course, stay in your current situation, but if you want to make that switch, it's ultimately your call. I'm not going to tell you to do it or not to do it. You got to consider your finances, of course, the time that you're investing, opportunity costs. But if it's what you want to do with your career, then by all means, go for it. And don't have concerns over being a so-called non-traditional student. There are plenty of people applying to law schools who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, even 70s, doing this as a second career or a third career. You're not too old to go to law school. Law schools love so-called non-traditional or older students with more life experience. And so if that's what you want to do, by all means, go for it. I have no criticisms of that path, of course. But also consider, are you happy in your current situation? If you love what you're doing now, might not be worth switching, but I'd imagine there's a reason that you're here right now, a reason you're asking this question. And so if you want to talk through that switch, I'm happy to have that conversation with you, but you might want to just see where the LSAT takes you. Study for it, see how you do, see how you feel about the LSAT. Of course, talk to current attorneys, talk to people practicing law in the areas that you want to practice, and see if that appeals to you upon further investigation. Marion is asking, I've heard majoring in philosophy gives you an edge on the LSAT. Is that true? I'll say this. It is true that philosophy majors tend to have higher LSAT scores on average than a lot of other majors, but there's a correlation causation question here of whether majoring in philosophy caused them to get higher LSAT scores, or whether people who major in philosophy are already predisposed to do well on the LSAT. Of course, could be a combination of both. But in other words, I'm saying that perhaps it is not that taking philosophy classes will teach you better for the LSAT. The best LSAT prep is actually studying for the LSAT specifically. I'm not going to say that you should take logic classes or study formal logic or anything like that. There are roughly 8,000 released LSAT practice questions, and any of those would be better material to study from than other subjects or other majors. And majoring in topics that you're not good at could tank your GPA and actually hurt you when it comes to law school admissions. So don't pursue philosophy just for the LSAT. Rather, study actual LSAT material for the best possible LSAT score. And Sydney, I'm glad you're finding the YouTube videos helpful. I'm so glad to hear that they've been helping you on your journey. And if you're finding the YouTube helpful, if you're finding this live helpful, of course, feel free to reach out to me for that free LSAT tutoring lesson I'm offering to everybody watching this now or later. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. Link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, and in my bio on TikTok as well. Open offer to everybody watching this now or later. I see some recurring questions here in the chat around what is the best undergrad for law school in Canada. Honestly, it doesn't really matter where you go to undergrad, whether you're applying to law school in the US or Canada. Law schools have no incentive to care where you went to undergrad because they're not evaluated based on that metric. They only have incentive to look at your undergraduate GPA and your LSAT score. That is it, not what you majored in and not where you went to undergrad. And so I could imagine for those of you still in high school, maybe you want to go to a public university. Maybe you want to start off at a community college, then transfer to a public four-year institution to save money on tuition, save some of that money for your LSAT prep and for law school, and then go to law school. Because whenever you are pursuing any type of graduate level degree, your undergrad becomes a lot less important, and where you went to graduate school becomes a lot more important. So I'm going to suggest that for those of you who have not yet pursued undergrad, maybe consider that path if you're confident law school is what you want to do. Of course, if you're not confident in law school and you might want to not pursue a graduate degree, then your undergrad matters a lot more. But otherwise, you might want to consider saving some money on your undergrad if you're truly ruthless about this. Arako's asking, to study for the LSAT and English level B2 C1, how long is it recommended to invest in prep for the LSAT? So I don't actually know what English level B2 C1 is. Is that like some sort of English language proficiency exam? So leaving that aside, studying for the LSAT in particular, I recommend giving yourself maybe a bit more time than average if English is not your first language, because the entire LSAT, you could argue, is a test of reading comprehension abilities. And so the LSAT is hard enough for native English speakers. It's even harder for non-native English speakers. So you might want to give yourself more time than for the average applicant. I recommend the average applicant allow at least 3 to 4 months for LSAT prep, ideally 5 to 6 months. If you're a non-native English speaker, maybe give yourself 6 to 8 months or beyond, depending on your relative level of English proficiency. So I hope that's helpful. Feel free to book the call with me if you want to talk through it more. Roxa BQ is asking, what program do you most recommend for LSAT prep considering cost and effectiveness? And so I actually have my own LSAT coaching program at LSAT Unplugged. We personalize every program for the individual student, considering your current LSAT score, your goal LSAT score, your time frame, where you want to go to law school. If you want to talk through your personal situation, you can book a free LSAT tutoring lesson with me at unpluggedprep.com/start. We offer private one-on-one coaching programs, live small group sessions via Zoom, 4 nights a week, semi-private classes, on-demand courses, custom study plans. We personalize every program for the individual, considering all of those factors. So you can talk through your situation with me personally. I'll help you craft the best plan of attack for you. Mommy to Toddlers Plus Twins is asking, is it hard to get a full scholarship for law school? I'll say yes to that overall. The more nuanced answer is it's all relative, right? So if you want to get a full ride to law school, the path forward to get there might not be easy, especially if you have young children, as your username indicates. I have young kids myself, so I know how it is. Toddlers as well, actually. And so the way that you get the full scholarship is by getting the best possible numbers relative to the school to which you're applying. And so scholarships are primarily determined by your LSAT score and your GPA. If your LSAT score and GPA are significantly above the medians of the schools to which you're applying, then they are more likely to give you scholarship money. The higher your numbers are, the more scholarship money you're likely to get. If you are way above on both the LSAT score and the GPA, you're more likely to get a full ride. So it's a simple path, but it's a difficult path depending on how high the numbers you need to be, how high you need those numbers to be for you. And so if your GPA was a bit below median, then you really want to be above the LSAT median to put yourself in the best possible situation to maximize your outcomes. Now to Sleepy Joe's question, what's a solid undergrad GPA? It's all relative once again, depending on the schools you're looking at. So for the top 14 law schools like Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Columbia, Cornell, NYU, their GPA medians are all roughly a 3.9 or so, or higher even. And so you want to ideally be at a 3.9 or a 4.0 GPA if those are the kinds of schools that you're targeting. If the schools that you're targeting only have a 3.7 GPA, then having a 3.8 already puts you above and you're in a pretty good situation there. Mommy to Toddlers is saying, I'm a nurse looking into law school but don't know where to start. I mean, the first place to start is by taking a diagnostic practice LSAT to see where you're at relative to your goals. And then you'll know what it's going to take to get the best possible LSAT score. And so if you take a cold diagnostic and your score is a 150 and you're aiming for a 170, given the schools you're looking at, or if you want that full ride, of course, then you got to get at least 20 points more on your LSAT. And you think to yourself, okay, well, how much time would I need to improve by 20 points, considering that I have young children? Maybe I've got to allow 4 months, 5 months. Maybe I'm going to aim for the LSAT in June. Maybe I'll aim to take the LSAT in August. But either way, those are both great timeframes because you can then apply to law school as soon as applications open in the fall. Might not be a bad course of action there, but again, every situation is different. There's a lot of context I'm missing here. And so if you want to book that free LSAT tutoring lesson with me, I'll be able to talk through your situation, help you craft a better plan of attack. Let's see. Exo Sugar Bomb Sweets asks, when would you recommend writing an addendum? Well, I guess it depends. What are the reasons you're considering an addendum, right? Is it because you have a low GPA? Is it because you have a low LSAT score? Is it because you have a gap in your resume? So I think the question's almost a little bit backwards here. I'd first want to hear about what is the unique situation that is leading you to ask this question, and then I can advise you on whether an addendum is a good idea. So for example, someone who has an arrest or a conviction for a misdemeanor or a felony even, or has a notation on their transcript for plagiarism, for example. Those are all reasons why somebody might need to write an addendum or a character and fitness statement to explain some sort of unique or undesirable situation or a red flag or a question mark on their record. I see here you wrote that second LSAT score is lower than the first. In my view, that does not necessitate or require an addendum because the numbers speak for themselves. Let's say you took it and you got a 165, you retook it, you got a 160. The 165 is what counts. That's it. No explanation necessary. If your score dropped not 5 points, but 20 points, that might raise a question. You can write a short addendum, concise, matter of fact, not excusing, but explaining that you had a bad proctor, you had a tech issue, you were sick that day. If you took it in person at a testing center, the person next to you was sniffling and sneezing a lot and that kind of distracted you, or the proctor was a jerk, whatever the case may be, you can write a couple sentences about that and that would be sufficient. No need to write anything more than that. But if your score only dropped 3 to 5 points, an addendum is not really necessary. I'd say don't worry about it. Tom is asking, would a double major and double minor with a 3.5 GPA be considered competitive at Yale? I got a 168 on the LSAT. Okay, so the double major, double minor, to me, none of that really matters. It's your GPA and your LSAT. The major minor stuff, it looks cool for your resume. It looks cool to talk about it to friends and whatnot, but that's a non-factor. It's your LSAT score and your GPA. That's it. Now, unfortunately, those numbers are not competitive. Yale's LSAT score median is probably around a 174. Their GPA median is probably around a 3.9, if not higher. And so you're below both numbers significantly. Their LSAT median's of 174 or so. Your score's of 168, so you're 6 points below on that. GPA median of 3.9 or higher. Yours is a 3.5. You're 0.4 below on that. So your numbers are actually significantly below. And so I would recommend retaking the LSAT and aiming for as close to a 180 as possible to compensate for the lower GPA. And also I would cast a wider net, look at a lot of other schools as well, some of them outside the T14, considering that you're below the numbers on both LSAT and GPA for all of the top 14 law schools. I know that's probably not what you want to hear, but it's the truth, and nothing less would serve you but to tell you that as matter-of-factly as I can. Just retake the LSAT. Your GPA is probably a done deal at this point, I'm guessing, so just get the LSAT score to compensate. Suki's asking, what sort of internships are the best during undergrad for law school? How much do they matter? So first of all, they don't really matter that much. Law school admissions is a lot more numbers driven than undergrad admissions is. So in other words, when you're in high school applying to college, being the president of this or that club is great. Being the captain of this or that team is great. They love to see the participation and leadership and all of that good stuff. But when it comes to law school admissions, it's really just a numbers game. Your LSAT score, your GPA. Everything else is a far distant third. Now, to that point, if you are going to pursue internships, what kinds are best? Of course, a paralegal internship is really good to have. Anything that shows a real world exposure to the practice of law is going to be helpful. But I would rather you get even 2 or 3 points more on the LSAT than to have an internship. And so if you're thinking about what am I going to do this summer, and I know I want to go to law school, maybe just studying for the LSAT is a perfectly fine way to spend your summer. If you want to have a part-time job or a part-time internship, that's fine, but I'd rather you make it part-time and carve out more time for LSAT prep than to make it full-time and not have enough time for LSAT prep. Beans Broken is asking, I've been out of school for a while and don't have a current GPA. Do I need a high LSAT score? I mean, I would argue that you always want to have a high LSAT score to have the best possible acceptances, best possible merit scholarships. The fact that your GPA is not current doesn't affect that one way or the other. Law schools will see your GPA anyway. They'll consider it anyway. But the longer you've been out of school, the more they will discount your GPA, the less your GPA will matter, and the more your LSAT score will matter because your GPA will less reflect who you are today, the longer ago you earned it, and the more your LSAT score will matter since that's the more recent number that they have to look at for you. So in other words, when you earned your GPA a long time ago, it diminishes in importance and that piece of the pie is taken over by your LSAT score. Gabe is asking, is going to a T14 super important? I have a 3.2 GPA and a 165, but I don't want to go to big law. Well, if you have a 3.2 GPA and a 165 LSAT score, I'll be frank, you're probably not going to get into a T14 law school anyway, because like I said, they require higher numbers. Their GPA medians are all around a 3.9. Their LSAT medians are all low 170s. You're below on both of those counts. And so you probably won't get into a T14 law school. You also don't have to go into a T14, of course. There are plenty of great employment outcomes to be had by going to a lower ranked school. And as a bonus, when you go to a lower ranked law school, you can get more scholarship money. And that's often a better path than going to a higher ranked law school with less scholarship money. And so if you don't want to go into big law, if you don't want to pursue a Supreme Court clerkship, for example, then you don't need a T14 necessarily, but you still want to have strong numbers anyway to get more scholarship money from a lower ranked law school. And so getting a higher LSAT score will put you in a better position regardless, even if you don't want a T14, because it will allow you to get more scholarships in merit aid. And that's especially important with the elimination of the Grad Plus loan starting in July. This will affect all of you starting law school this fall and beyond. Basically, you will not be able to take out federal government loans for all of your tuition in most cases, if you're paying sticker at least. And so you're going to need to have more merit aid scholarships to cover the cost of law school, unless you want to take out private loans or pay out of pocket. So a strong recommendation for all of you out there to go for the merit aid. And Joshua, I do see your questions here, but I'm trying to prioritize those from folks who have not already asked something. So I'm going to prioritize the other questions coming in here. Anini's asking, what's the ideal timeline for taking the LSAT and applying for 2027? So if you want to apply to law school to start in fall 2027, I'm guessing here, that means you want to, if you want to start law school in fall 2027, it means you want to ideally apply to law school in the fall of 2026. Now, if you want to apply in fall 2026, you want to take the LSAT ideally in April, June, or August so that you're ready to submit the second applications open in the fall. So I recommend you aim for the LSAT roughly 3 months from now as your first take. You then have June as a backup, and you have August as a second backup or a third take. That way, if you have a bad proctor or a tech issue, you have some retakes on your schedule, and it's not going to be too late, and you can still apply the second applications open in the fall. So either your first take is April or June, and your second take is June or August. Then applications open typically September 1st or September 15th, and you will be ready to hit submit on those applications when they open. You don't have to apply that early, of course, but it's really the optimal schedule in my opinion. That's what I would go for. Evie's asking, what are the best extracurriculars to pursue in undergrad to get into a T14 law school? I mean, anything legal is nice, of course, but EC's extracurriculars really don't matter that much for law school admissions. Much better to just have a higher LSAT score and higher GPA. I made the mistake in undergrad of focusing too much on things like Model UN and Model Congress and student newspaper stuff like that. Law schools don't care that much about those factors relative to having a couple more points on the LSAT. So if you want to pursue the extracurriculars for your own interests, by all means, that's great, go for it. But better to have a few points more on the LSAT for best possible admissions chances. BBRK is asking, is there a such thing as international law? Ooh, spicy. Maybe theoretically, yes. There are a lot of people who pursue international law, but you could also make a reasonable argument that any law is only meaningful or existent to the extent to which one can enforce it. And if there's no body with the ability to enforce a law, then does it really even exist? As a side note, international law is almost cliche in that law schools perceive applicants who talk about international law as being somewhat naive and not having a real world understanding of the practice of law. That's debatable, of course. I'm not expressing a personal opinion here, just saying how law schools might perceive it. And so you might want to talk about other areas of law rather than international law specifically on your application if you want to be viewed as a serious applicant with a real world understanding of the practice of law. Of course, be honest, be forthright in why you want to go to law school, but you still have the freedom to emphasize certain topics over other topics if you would like to do so. And you can, of course, talk to practicing attorneys in the areas of law that you might want to consider specializing in to get a general sense of what areas you might want to pursue for your own career going forward. So just some food for thought there to consider. Nini's asking, is it frowned upon to take time off from work to full-time study or prep for your applications? Not necessarily. I mean, if you have a gap on your resume, of course, you can explain that if you want to. You could also volunteer a little bit here or there to fill in your resume a little bit to show that you've been keeping busy doing something aside from studying for the LSAT. But to be quite frank here, the people who do the best on the LSAT and get the highest scores typically spend more than just a couple of months studying for this. And a lot of them, to be frank, they're actually studying for the LSAT significantly part-time or even full-time. Not saying you have to do that, of course, but a lot of folks give it a lot of time for the highest possible scores, and that is your competition, right? So a lot of people try to knock this out in just a couple of months studying part-time, but if we look at those who scored a 170 or 175 plus in particular, a lot of them spent significantly more than just a couple of months or just a couple of, or even just putting in 10, 15, even 20 hours a week to achieve their fullest potential. So you might need to give it a bit more time if those are the folks you're competing with, if you want that elite level score, if you want a top LSAT score for the best possible admissions outcomes. And by the way, folks, if you're finding this helpful, I run these lives every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, wherever you're watching this. If you find this helpful, please spread the word. The only way these lives grow is through word of mouth. I don't do any advertising for these, and the algorithm doesn't really boost these lives because they can't run ads during them. And so I really appreciate your spreading the word by sharing this live on your socials, your TikTok, Instagram, in any groups you're part of, any Discords or Reddit threads or forums or Facebook groups or group chats. Really do appreciate your help. And by the way, folks, if you want to talk through your situation in particular, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons to everybody watching this now or later. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, and in my bio on TikTok as well. Open offer to everybody watching this now or later. Again, unpluggedprep.com/start. Now, I do see more questions coming in here. I'll get to as many as I can in the remaining time. Heyo's asking, how important is a resume to apply for law school? So your resume is not as important as your LSAT score or your GPA. The one place that your resume can be important is if you want to demonstrate real-world exposure to the practice of law, so that you can show you have a more in-depth, concrete, real-world understanding of the practice of law relative to those who are just inspired by a pop culture or social media, watching shows like Suits or Better Call Saul or the movie Legally Blonde or To Kill a Mockingbird, for example. And so if you have volunteered in politics or law, if you have gotten an internship or worked as a paralegal, all of that is definitely helpful and worth highlighting on your resume, talking about it in your application essays. But your resume is still not as important as your LSAT score and GPA. So basically, in other words, you want to have the numbers first and foremost. If you have the numbers, if you are at or above the medians for LSAT and GPA, then you can switch gears and think about your LSAT, your resume and your work experience, but it's not going to compensate if you don't already have the numbers. Lady Juliana is asking, I took a prep quiz. Is it a good sign of where you might stand with your LSAT score? And so my first question is, this prep quiz, was it like a mini diagnostic? And if so, how many questions were on it? Was it using real LSAT questions? If it wasn't using real LSAT questions and it was just a mini quiz, it's not going to be that indicative. I would say if you want to get an actual understanding of where you stand LSAT prep-wise, you really do want to have a real cold diagnostic that you've taken in full. Now, there are real LSAT practice tests available to you for free on LSAC's Law Hub platform. You can access 4 practice tests for free on the Law Hub platform with a free lsac.org account. And the additional benefit of taking a full practice test is that it gives you the full shebang, real world conditions. You could take it where you're not only looking at your accuracy, but also your time management, your pacing, and your endurance. In other words, if you do a 10-question mini quiz, it's not necessarily representative of taking a full exam, because a 10-question mini quiz involving easy, unofficial, fake LSAT questions is a very different experience than taking a full sitting with 100 questions over the course of 2.5 hours. For most people, their brain's going to be fried after doing 2.5 hours, and it's a lot harder than doing a short 10-question quiz. So do a full practice test, see where you stand, see where you score relative to your goal score, and that will give you a better indication of just how much work is between you and achieving your goal. So take that full practice test, see where you're at, see how far off you are from where you want to be, and then craft a plan of attack towards hitting your goal. And of course, if you want my help after you take that practice test, or if you want guidance on how to do it, of course, you can book that free LSAT lesson with me personally. I'll be happy to talk you through your situation, help you craft the best possible plan of attack. I see DJ Walton's asking, would you recommend going to a testing center or taking it remotely? There are benefits and pros and cons to each, right? So when you take the LSAT from home, you are relying on your internet connection being reliable. You are relying on your roommates, significant others, friends and family not interrupting you during the exam. But the downside is you have a remote proctor who might be unreliable or might interrupt you over the course of the exam. In person, at a testing center, the benefit is you have their internet, their computer, no other roommates or whatnot being around to interrupt you or screw things up. On the other hand, you have potential distractions from other test takers in that testing center. So pros and cons. On balance, I typically recommend taking it in person to minimize the issues with the remote proctoring, because that has been a consistent issue for a lot of test takers. And so you remove a lot of those factors when you take it at the testing center. Of course, you consider what you think your pros and cons, given the decision calculus there. Each side has its benefits, of course. Kaylin's asking, would you recommend tutoring for the LSAT? Of course, I personally recommend it. I've seen the benefits it can get students to have some more personalized feedback and attention. Of course, it does have the investment associated with it, but if you can afford it, I think it's well worth the investment, because personalized feedback is, in my view, the best way to maximize your score. Because the thing is that when you're studying on your own, you don't know what you don't know. And so getting some expert guidance from someone who's already been there, gotten that top score, been through the process themselves, it's going to make your path forward that much smoother. And so if you'd like my help, I'm offering free online LSAT tutoring for everybody watching this now or later, a private one-on-one video call with me personally. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok as well. Open offer to everybody watching this now and later. I see Frida was asking about the private tutoring as well. Feel free to book that call with me. Open invitation to everybody. Happy to help. I'll see you all tomorrow, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific. I'm happy to help. See you all then. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care. Thanks for watching.